I'm not introducing you to my wealthy friends. You'd embarrass me.
Understood. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Daniel Brooks, the man who owns this entire country club.
Wait, you own this place?
My fiancée told me I was too embarrassing to meet her wealthy friends. 3 hours later, she watched the president of her country club cross a crowded ballroom, shake my hand, and announce that I owned the building beneath her feet. But that was not the moment our relationship ended. It had ended earlier, in front of our bedroom mirror, when she looked at the man who loved her and decided his value could be measured by his shirt. Hello. My name is Daniel Brooks. I was 42 years old when I learned that the woman I planned to marry did not love me. She loved the version of me she thought she could improve. At the time, I ran Brooks Mechanical, a heating and air conditioning company in Northern Virginia. I had 12 employees, 5 service vans, and a small office behind an auto parts store. I also owned something almost no one knew about, but I will get to that. That Friday evening, Victoria Hale stood in front of our bedroom mirror wearing a fitted navy dress and diamond earrings. She was beautiful, polished, and completely at home in rooms where people judged one another by watches, last names, and vacation homes. I stood in the doorway wearing a clean gray work shirt. There was still a faint line of grease beneath one thumbnail. I had spent the afternoon helping a new technician repair a broken chiller at a nursing home. Victoria fastened one earring and glanced at my reflection. "I'll probably be home around midnight," she said. "Don't wait up." I asked if that was another country club event. Her hand stopped. For 2 months, every weekend had belonged to the Ashford Hills Country Club. There had been tennis lunches, wine tastings, committee dinners, and charity meetings. Victoria always went alone. We had been engaged for 7 months. I had never demanded an invitation, but that evening was different. It was the club's annual legacy gala, and Victoria had spent weeks talking about it. So I asked a simple question. "Why don't I come with you?" She slowly placed her gold clutch on the dresser. "Daniel, please don't make this difficult. I'm only asking." She turned around and looked at my work shirt, my old boots, and then my hands. "These people are important," she said. "They are investors, executives, and families with real influence. And what am I?" She gave a tired sigh, as if I were a child refusing to understand. "You're a good man, but you repair air conditioners for a living. You don't know how these people talk. You would tell some long story about a broken furnace or complain about labor costs. You'd embarrass me." The words hurt, but her calm voice hurt more. She had rehearsed them. This was not a careless insult. It was a decision. I looked at the woman I planned to marry. "You're ashamed of me." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." She lifted her chin. "I'm building relationships that could change my career. I'm not introducing you to my wealthy friends until you learn how to fit in." I nodded once. "Understood." Something in my voice made her study me, but only for a second. Then she picked up her clutch. "Don't be dramatic. We'll talk tomorrow." She walked past me. A minute later, I heard the front door close. I stayed beside the mirror and looked at the empty space where she had been. On the dresser sat our wedding planning folder. The date was 4 months away. Victoria wanted a ceremony at Ashford Hills, though she had complained that the waiting list was long and the rental fee was outrageous. What she did not know was that her name had already been moved to the top of that list. I had done it quietly. I opened the bottom drawer and removed a black envelope that had arrived that morning. Inside was an invitation printed on thick ivory paper. "Mr. Daniel Brooks, chairman of the Brooks Family Trust, requests the pleasure of your attendance at the Ashford Hills Legacy Gala." The invitation had not come through Victoria. It had come from the club president, Charles Whitmore. My phone rang before I could put it away. The caller was my attorney, Elena Ruiz. "Daniel," she said, "I'm sorry to bother you tonight, but I found something connected to the club." Elena had been reviewing the accounts of the Brooks Family Trust. My grandfather had created that trust before he died, and I had recently become its controlling trustee. I asked what she had found. "Someone accessed the confidential property files 3 times this month," she said. "They viewed the Ashford parcel, the clubhouse appraisal, and the redevelopment restrictions. My eyes moved toward the window. Victoria's red Mercedes was gone. The login belongs to a junior analyst at Bellwether Development. I knew that name. Victoria was the director of public relations at Bellwether. Alina continued. The analyst says he used the file because a senior executive told him it was public. It isn't. Daniel, someone at Bellwether may be preparing an offer for Ashford Hills. The property isn't for sale. They may not know that yet. I asked her to send me everything. When the documents arrived, one name appeared repeatedly beside Victoria's. Grant Mercer. Grant was Bellwether's executive vice president. Victoria mentioned him almost every day. According to her, Grant understood powerful people. Grant knew how careers were built. Grant had sponsored her country club membership. I had never met him. I returned to the dresser and noticed something beneath Victoria's jewelry tray, the corner of a folded sheet of paper. I should have left it alone. Instead, I pulled it free. It was an event schedule for the gala. Victoria's handwriting filled the margins. At 9:15 after the club president's speech, she had written, Grant announces Ashford acquisition. I introduce renewal vision. Board vote Monday. At the bottom was one more note. Once deal closes, no more pretending with Daniel. I read that sentence 3 times. My chest felt cold. Victoria was not merely ashamed of me. She was planning a future without me, and she was using information connected to my family to build it. Then I saw a paper clipped behind the schedule. It was a draft press release. Bellwether Development was preparing to announce the purchase of Ashford Hills Country Club for $86 million. The property they claimed they were buying belonged to my trust, and no one had asked me to sell it. Most people believed Ashford Hills was owned by its members. That was only partly true. The club operated the golf course, restaurant, and ballroom through a member-owned corporation. But the corporation did not own the land. It held a 99-year lease signed by my grandfather, Samuel Brooks, in 1984. My grandfather had grown up poor. He began as a carpenter, bought unwanted farmland outside Washington, and watched the city spread toward it. He never cared about joining elite clubs. He cared about land, contracts, and keeping promises. When Ashford Hills was struggling, he leased the property to its members at a fair rate. The contract protected the club from developers, required public charity events, and guaranteed jobs for local workers. After he died, the property passed into the Brooks family trust. Then it passed to me. I kept my ownership private because I liked my life. I liked repairing systems, employing people, and solving problems with my hands. I did not want strangers treating me differently because of a deed stored in an attorney's vault. Victoria knew my grandfather had left me some property. She never asked what kind. I had planned to tell her after our wedding. Now I was grateful I had waited. I called Alina again. Can Bellwether buy the club without the land? They could buy the operating corporation, she said. But the lease has a change of control clause. Any sale requires the trust's written approval. And they don't have it. No. But there's another problem. Someone gave Bellwether a document that appears to be your approval. She sent it to me. At first glance, it looked real. It carried the trust's logo, the property description, and a digital version of my signature. But the signature came from an old tax form. The authorization was forged. Below it was the name of the person who claimed to have witnessed it, Victoria Hale. For several seconds, I could hear nothing except my own breathing. I wanted to call her. I wanted to demand an explanation while she was still in her car. Alina stopped me. Do not warn her, she said. If this was a mistake, we'll learn that. If it wasn't, we need the original records preserved. She had already contacted the trust's cybersecurity consultant and an outside investigator. The first results arrived within an hour. 2 weeks earlier, Victoria had used my home printer to scan a document at 1:17 in the morning. The file name matched the forged authorization. She had then sent it to a private email address connected to Grant Mercer. That was not a mistake. It was a plan. I sat at the kitchen table where Victoria and I had eaten breakfast that morning. She had kissed my cheek before leaving for work. She had asked me to pick up her dry cleaning. All the while, she knew she had copied my signature. At 8 o'clock, a message appeared on her tablet, which was still connected to our shared home account. It came from Grant. Everything ready. Once Whitmore announces retirement, we control the room. Keep your fiancé away. Victoria replied from her phone. He thinks I'm at a charity dinner. Daniel is useful, but he has no ambition. After tonight, I won't need useful. I did not break the tablet. I did not scream. I took photographs of the messages and sent them to Alina. Then I called Charles Whitmore. Charles was 68, silver-haired, and old-fashioned in the best sense. He had served as club president for 11 years, and he knew exactly who owned the land. When he answered, music was playing behind him. "Daniel, are you on your way?" "Not yet." "Did you agree to sell the club to Bellwether?" The music seemed to disappear. "Absolutely not. I told him about the press release." Charles was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Grant Mercer asked for 15 minutes on tonight's program. He said Bellwether was making a donation to the Youth Scholarship Fund. Are you announcing your retirement?" "I plan to. The board asked me to stay through the end of the year, but Grant offered to introduce the next president." "Woo. That is the strange part. He wouldn't say. I already knew." Victoria had not spent months building friendships simply to attend parties. She and Grant were planning to take control of the club's board, approve Bellwether's purchase, and force the land transfer with a forged document. But one question remained. Why would Grant risk his career for Victoria? The answer arrived at 1823. Elena found a private company registered in Delaware. Its owners were hidden behind 2 other corporations, but the payment records were not hidden well enough. If the Ashford deal closed, that company would receive a $6 million consulting fee. The beneficiaries were Grant Mercer and Victoria Hale. My fiancée was not leaving me for a better career. She was stealing $6 million on her way out. Charles asked what I wanted him to do. I looked at the gala invitation. "Continue the program," I said. "Daniel." "Yes." "Let them make their announcement." I went upstairs and changed. I chose a black suit my grandfather had bought me years earlier. It was simple, perfectly fitted, and more expensive than anything Victoria had ever seen me wear. Before leaving, I removed my engagement ring from the small dish beside the bed. Victoria had insisted we both wear rings during the engagement. I placed mine on top of the wedding folder. Then I drove to Ashford Hills. The entrance curved through old oak trees wrapped in white lights. Valets hurried between luxury cars. Through the tall windows, I could see chandeliers glowing above hundreds of guests. I handed my truck keys to a young valet named Marcus. He recognized me immediately. 2 winters earlier, his mother's heating system had failed during a snowstorm. My company replaced it without charging her. "Mr. Brooks," he said, smiling. "I didn't know you were a member." "I'm not." He looked confused. "Then are you here as a guest?" I glanced at the limestone building my grandfather had saved 42 years earlier. Something like that. As I climbed the front steps, I saw Victoria through the glass doors. She was standing beside Grant Mercer. His hand rested on the small of her back, and she was smiling at him the way she used to smile at me. The ballroom looked like a scene from a magazine. Crystal chandeliers hung over white tables. A string quartet played beside the dance floor. Men in tuxedos and women in evening gowns moved beneath gold banners, celebrating the club's history. Victoria stood near the stage with Grant. He was tall, gray at the temples, and confident in the way of a man who had never been forced to hear the word no. I entered quietly. Several board members recognized me from trust meetings, but Charles had warned them to say nothing. They greeted me with small nods. Victoria saw me before I reached the center of the room. Her smile vanished. She crossed the ballroom quickly. "What are you doing here?" she whispered. "You said this was an important evening." "I told you not to come." "No, you told me I would embarrass you." Her eyes moved over my suit. For 1 second, confusion replaced anger. She had never seen this version of me. Then she gripped my arm and guided me toward a side corridor. "Listen to me," she said. "Grant is about to make a major announcement. If you create a scene, You could destroy everything I've worked for. What exactly have you worked for? She stared at me. I continued. Is it the promotion, the board position, or the $6 million consulting fee? The color left her face. I don't know what you're talking about. Then you won't mind if I stay. A Grant approached us, holding 2 champagne glasses. Victoria, is there a problem? She answered too quickly. This is Daniel. A Grant's eyes flicked toward my hands, as though he expected to find a wrench in them. The repairman, he said. I smiled. The executive. He did not understand the correction. Victoria forced a laugh. Daniel was just leaving. A Grant placed 1 glass on a passing server's tray. His voice became soft and threatening. This is a private event, members and invited guests only. I removed the ivory invitation from my jacket and handed it to him. He read my name. Then he read it again. Victoria stared at the words, Brooks Family Trust. Her lips parted, but the quartet stopped before she could speak. Charles Whitmore stepped onto the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. A Grant recovered quickly. He handed the invitation back and led Victoria toward the front table. She looked over her shoulder at me. For the first time since I had known her, I saw fear in her eyes. I sat at an empty table near the rear. Charles welcomed the guests and spoke about the club's scholarship program. Then he announced Bellwether's promised donation. Applause filled the ballroom. Grant took the stage. He spoke about progress, opportunity, and protecting tradition through change. He was good at it. Every dangerous idea sounds safer when it is wrapped in beautiful words. Then he invited Victoria to stand beside him. She walked onto the stage with her practiced smile restored. Grant announced that Bellwether had reached an agreement to acquire the Ashford Hills Operating Company and begin an $86 million redevelopment. A large image appeared on the screen behind them. It showed luxury towers where the West Golf Course now stood. People began whispering. Grant raised one hand. This partnership will secure Ashford's future, and I am pleased to announce that Victoria Hale will serve as the new president of the restructured club. Some guests applauded. Others looked stunned. Victoria stepped to the microphone. Ashford Hills has always represented excellence, she said. Tonight we begin a new chapter. Then Charles returned to the stage. Grant looked irritated. Charles smiled at the audience. Before that chapter begins, I believe we should hear from the man who owns the page. The room became silent. Charles looked toward the back table. Mr. Daniel Brooks, would you please join us? Every face turned toward me. I stood. Victoria's expression changed as I crossed the ballroom. First confusion, then realization, then pure panic. Charles shook my hand. For guests who may not know him, Daniel Brooks is the controlling trustee of the Brooks Family Trust. His family owns every acre beneath this clubhouse, the golf course, the tennis center, and the proposed development site. No one moved. Charles added, in other words, ladies and gentlemen, Daniel owns the place. The silence broke into shocked voices. Victoria stared at me as though I had become a stranger. Grant stepped toward the microphone. That is a misleading description. We have written authorization from the trust. No, I said. You have a forgery. 2 large screens behind us changed. The development image disappeared. In its place appeared the false authorization letter. I pointed to the signature. That signature was copied from a tax document. I did not approve a sale, a transfer, or a change in control. Grant's confidence finally cracked. This is an internal legal disagreement. Then let's discuss the internal legal details. The next slide showed access records, email dates, and the Delaware Consulting Company. I did not show private romantic messages. I did not need to humiliate Victoria more than the facts already did. I simply explained that confidential trust documents had been accessed without permission, a signature had been copied, and $6 million had been directed toward a company controlled by 2 people involved in the deal. Grant reached for the microphone. Charles moved it away. At the rear doors, 2 Bellwether attorneys entered with the company's chief compliance officer. Alina walked beside them. She had contacted Bellwether's board before I left home. Grant's face went gray. The compliance officer approached the stage. Mr. Mercer, you are suspended effective immediately. You are required to surrender your company phone and credentials. Grant looked at Victoria. It was a small movement, but everyone saw it. She stepped away from him. Grant told me the authorization was valid, she said. He laughed once without humor. You created it. You told me to. There it was. Not an apology, not regret. Only two guilty people deciding who should fall first. Victoria turned to me. Daniel, please. We need to speak privately. I looked at the woman who, 3 hours earlier, had told me I was unworthy to meet her friends. No, I said. You wanted this room to know who you are. Let them. She lowered her voice. I made a mistake. A mistake is forgetting a date. You copied my signature, planned to steal from my family trust, and wrote that you would leave me after the money arrived. Her eyes filled with tears. You read my notes. That question told me everything. She was not ashamed of what she had done. She was angry that I had discovered it. I removed her engagement ring from my pocket. I had found it beside the sink after she left, where she always placed it while applying makeup. I set it on the podium. Our engagement is over. She stared at the ring. Then, in a voice small enough that only those near the stage could hear, she said, You never told me you were rich. I answered, You never asked who I was. You only asked what I could do for you. Justice did not arrive in a single dramatic moment. The gala was only the beginning. Bellwether's board opened a full investigation. Grant was fired within 48 hours. The company withdrew its offer, reported the forged documents to federal investigators, and cooperated to avoid being treated as part of the fraud. Victoria was dismissed the following Monday. The district attorney later charged both of them with fraud, conspiracy. Grant accepted a plea agreement. Victoria fought the charges for months before entering a guilty plea when investigators recovered the original scanned files from her personal cloud account. She avoided prison, but she received probation, community service, and a restitution order that consumed most of her savings. The club board revoked her membership. Her wealthy friends disappeared faster than the champagne bubbles from that night. I did not celebrate her ruin. That surprised me. For several weeks, anger had kept me moving. Once the legal work slowed, grief took its place. I had loved Victoria. At least, I had loved the person I believed she was. I packed her belongings carefully. I did not throw them onto the lawn or destroy the dresses she valued more than my dignity. I hired a moving company and sent everything to a storage unit paid through the end of the month. Then I changed the locks. One evening, she came to the house. She looked different without the expensive dress, the diamonds, and the confidence. She stood on the porch wearing jeans and a plain coat. I spoke to her through the security camera. She asked for 5 minutes. I should have refused. Instead, I stepped outside and closed the door behind me. Victoria looked at the workshop beside the garage. She had passed it hundreds of times without asking what I built there. Were you testing me? She asked. No. Then why did you hide everything? I didn't hide my character. I hid a number. She shook her head. If I had known you owned Ashford, none of this would have happened. That is why it had to remain unknown. She stared at me. I continued. If the truth about my money would have changed how you treated me, then the way you treated me without it was the truth. For the first time, she had no answer. She said Grant had manipulated her. She said she had felt trapped in a small life. She said all her friends were moving forward while she was marrying a man who came home smelling like machine oil. I listened. Then I asked one question. When did you stop loving me? Her eyes moved away. I don't know. That is the first honest thing you've said. She began to cry. Part of me wanted to comfort her. My body still remembered the old habit of reaching for her when she was hurt. But compassion does not require surrender. I wished her well and went back inside. She never returned. The Ashford Hills board asked me what I intended to do with the property. Bellwether's proposal had frightened many employees. They believed I might sell to another developer. At the next board meeting, I brought my grandfather's original lease. I told them the land would not be sold. Instead, the trust signed a new long-term agreement, It protected the historic course, funded repairs to the clubhouse, and required the club to expand its scholarship program. But I made one major change. Ashford Hills had always been called exclusive. Too often, that word had meant excluding good people because they lacked the right connections. We created a community membership program for teachers, first responders, small business owners, and military families. We opened the West Dining Hall for local events at affordable rates. We also established a trade school scholarship for students studying electrical work, plumbing, and heating systems. Some older members complained. Charles smiled and told them they were free to find another country club built on land they owned. Most of them stayed. Marcus, the young valet who had parked my truck on gala night, became the first Brooks trade scholar. He studied commercial refrigeration while working part-time at my company. 2 years later, he became one of my best technicians. As for me, I kept running Brooks Mechanical. People often asked why a man who owned land worth more than $100 million still climbed onto rooftops and helped repair old equipment. The answer was simple. Money can buy comfort. It can buy access, influence, and a seat in an elegant ballroom. But useful work reminds me that my hands have value, even when no one recognizes my name. One autumn evening, I attended the first scholarship dinner, held under the new agreement. The ballroom looked almost the same as it had on the night of the gala. The chandeliers glowed, music drifted across the room. But the guests were different. At one table sat firefighters and their families. At another sat teachers, apprentices, and local business owners. Club members who had never spoken to the staff were laughing with servers they now knew by name. Charles found me standing near the back. "You know," he said, "you could sit at the head table." I looked across the room at Marcus and his mother. She was crying as he accepted his scholarship certificate. "I can see everything from here." Charles nodded toward a woman standing beside the scholarship committee. Her name was Rachel. She ran a nonprofit that helped veterans enter skilled trades. "She has asked 3 people about you," he said. "Did you tell her I own the place?" Charles smiled. "No. I told her you fix air conditioners." Rachel walked over a few minutes later. She looked at my hands, noticed the small cut near my thumb, and asked if I had been working that day. I told her about a failed boiler at an elementary school. Her face brightened. "My team did." "Then those children were lucky you showed up." That was all. No questions about my net worth. No sudden change in her voice. No calculation behind her smile. We talked until the staff began clearing tables. I did not rush into another relationship. I had learned that trust should be built slowly, in ordinary moments when there is nothing glamorous to gain. But Rachel and I became friends. Then, much later, we became something more. The last time I heard about Victoria, she was working for a small marketing agency in another state. A mutual acquaintance said she had become quieter and more careful with people. I hope that was true. Revenge was never watching her lose her job, her membership, or her false friends. My real revenge was refusing to become cruel because she had been cruel to me. I protected what my grandfather built. I gave opportunities to people her circle would have ignored, and I created a life in which no one needed an expensive invitation to be treated with dignity. Victoria once believed I would embarrass her because I did not belong among wealthy people. She was wrong. I belonged in that ballroom before she ever entered it. But the lesson I carried out of it was worth more than the land beneath our feet. Never beg for a seat at someone's table when your self-respect is the foundation holding up the entire room.